Okay, so today in this stream, I'm going to go over kind of some current political events that don't have to do with the election, but almost everything now has to do with the election. So we're kind of just going to go through and look at the latest impeachment updates, which is kind of probably the political news that stands out the most. Another interesting thing that I saw in the news over the week was something to do with Minnesota police and a change in their uniform patterns. And finally, we're going to talk about the Republican National Convention, which is happening in 2020, and talk about how preparations for that are already happening.
Yeah, and so then we're also going to cover like the general and Democratic primary debates, and then we're going to end off with the Senate and some election interference stuff.
All right, so let's get started. So kind of some background. If you don't know a lot about what's happening with impeachment, kind of what happened at the beginning was Nancy Pelosi announced an inquiry after what was basically alleged efforts by the president to get Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden. So, according to a memo, Trump asked a certain person to investigate Biden and look into a cybersecurity firm that did work for the Democrats in the 2016 election. So, this kind of dated back almost prior to the impeachment inquiry actually starting. Additionally, we kind of had someone else, Rudy Giuliani, become involved. And with kind of everything going on, there's basically things that have started to lead up to the actual inquiry being formed, basically. So pressure had been building within the Democratic Party for almost the past 2 years. There were talks of impeachment before he even took office. So the formal effort started just about a month ago, and pressure had been building because of three main events. So there had already been some talk about campaign finance violations that he could have committed with the Stormy Daniels case. There was also talk about the Russia inquiry with whether he collaborated with Russia during the 2016 election and its possible impacts. And another thing was unconstitutional business profits during his time as presidency. So a lot of times, as you'll learn in AP government, if you're in that class, conflict of interest is a huge thing in government that isn't tolerated, especially when a lot of these politicians are very rich. They come from esteemed backgrounds and they hold business or they have business holdings in foreign countries. So having these is not always legal, and making profits off of them can possibly lead to a change in interest and a hidden agenda. So generally, profits that are made in other countries are kind of looked down upon. So kind of all of these things together, and now with the Ukraine scandal and Biden, have led up to the impeachment inquiry actually happening. We go to the next slide. So some things that happened just within the past week. So Rudy Giuliani associates of Rudy Giuliani were some Ukrainian-born businessmen. So obviously Ukraine is a country that is at the center of all this impeachment business. They were arrested on campaign finance charges. So these were two Ukrainian-born businessmen, and apparently these two men helped Rudy Giuliani, who is an associate of the president, meet with a Ukrainian prosecutor. And this was basically a push again to investigate Biden. So all of this with impeachment actually revolves around, again, 2020 election and Biden. So there are some opinions and some reports that basically the reason why Trump is going after Biden, or Trump wants to investigate Biden, is because Biden is currently a front runner in the Democratic Party for the presidential nomination. So some people say that he wants to get Biden as low as possible in the polls so that he could possibly face a less stronger candidate. And some reports show that Elizabeth Warren may be the candidate he's hoping for because she is a little bit less moderate compared to Biden. And several businesses have said that, big businesses have said that they would support Trump over Elizabeth Warren, even those that have given to primarily Democratic candidates in the past. So that's kind of a backstory to this. These two associates that were arrested were actually supposed to appear in Congress just, I think, hours hours after their arrest. So evidently, there is definitely a connection between what they did in the impeachment proceedings, and they have now been subpoenaed by the House. So subpoena is another key term that you will probably need to know in AP government. and can really enhance their FRQ responses. Subpoena is basically like a requirement, or it's almost similar to a warrant. So they're calling you and they're telling you you have to testify before Congress. So they're requiring you to testify. That's what's happened with these two associates. All right. So the other thing that has happened in this week is that the president, as expected, has decided that he is not going to meet the request for documents and witnesses regarding the impeachment inquiry. So he's basically calling it partisan. And he's saying that, or Nancy Pelosi is saying that this could be an evidence of obstruction, because she's saying, and the Democratic Party is saying, that if he's not willing to comply with the investigation, then there's something that's being hidden. So if you get, like, I mean, if you read the tweet, this is about another possible witness. So recently, what has been happening is that the Congress has been subpoenaing, or they've been requiring people to come up and testify about what's been happening with impeachment. So the State Department, or Congress, wanted to ask an ambassador to the EU, a former ambassador to the EU, for information, but the State Department blocked this person from testifying. So the State Department obviously is still in relation with the president and the president's cabinet. So the main thing with this ambassador is that there are text messages that were exchanged between a Ukrainian Democrat and this person, not Ukrainian Democrat, a Ukrainian diplomat and this person. So that's the main reason why Democrats want to investigate what was actually exchanged. So Trump kind of replied to this and said he's a really good person, but he's testifying between basically a rigged court, and Republicans' rights have been taken away, and Democrats are going too far with this process. So that's kind of his opinion. The other thing with what Dylan asked, okay, so was the Russia investigation an impeachment inquiry that never made it to trial, or just investigation? The Russia investigation is not the focus of this impeachment inquiry. However, the Russia investigation were focuses of investigations that happened in the past. So no, it did not cause an actual impeachment inquiry, but it prompted calls by other people and calls by other Democrats in Congress to investigate impeachment. So actually, right before this inquiry happened with Ukraine, Nancy Pelosi was actually opposed to the impeachment proceedings, and she said that it would really only weaken the Democratic Party. However, now after the Ukrainian scandal happened, that's when she kind of shifted her position. But when it was relevant, it was just investigation, as in a formal impeachment inquiry was never filed. Yes, it was just investigation. There was no formal impeachment inquiry that was filed. The formal impeachment inquiry that is filed now is to do with the Ukrainian scandal. It does not have to do with the Russia investigation. All right, so the next slide. So another big thing that has been happening over the past few weeks is that Biden and Trump have both kind of amped up their rhetoric and campaign stops over the past week. So up until now, Biden hasn't come out and directly said that he's in favor of Trump being impeached. Like, he hasn't said that directly. He has implied it, that there needs to be certain evidence, there needs to be more evidence, and he's kind of talked his way around it. However, he hadn't actually stated that he's in favor of it. This past week on a campaign trail, he did say that he's in favor of Trump's impeachment, as have many Democratic candidates. Additionally, Trump, who is obviously against his own impeachment, said that, this is a quote, "They want to erase their vote like it never existed. They want to erase their voice. They want to erase their future. But they will fail because in America, the people rule again." And then it kind of goes on. But what Trump is saying is that, again, this impeachment inquiry as a whole is a partisan inquiry, and that he did not do anything wrong that went against his oath of office, which is what everyone else is, basically all the Democrats are concerned about, is that it went against his oath of office. So on the next slide is kind of a chart that Robbie put up last week for the size that I thought was really good. So a lot of times we don't focus on what the impeachment inquiry could actually result in. So the House of Representatives right now is controlled by the Democrats. So any member of the House, so if you start on the top left, it says any member of the House of Representatives may introduce an impeachment resolution, basically because of anything wrong that they believe the president did. This can include treason, bribery, or what's called a high crime and misdemeanor. So these are all basically major crimes that the president can be convicted of, and can be the reason for an impeachment inquiry. Then it goes to the House Judiciary Committee, where a simple majority of the committee must vote to kind of get it through. And then the House of Representatives debates and votes. Again, only a simple majority is required. Simple majority is just 51%. So one more than half needs to vote. And then the charges are brought forward to the Senate. So something that you'll probably see on your AP exam if you're taking government is the impeachment process and how it works. Just know that the Senate is the one that actually conducts the trial. A way to remember that is that the Senate kind of acts like the judges, and you wouldn't want like over 400 judges that are in the House of Representatives to determine what's happening. So the Senate is a smaller number, and that's why they actually decide. What happens after it goes from the House to the Senate is that they need to write the bill of indictment and formally inform the president. So obviously the president knows it's happening, but once the president is quote unquote informed, then that's when the trial can happen. So the trial is headed by the Chief Justice, and I believe that's John Roberts, and the jury is made up of the senators. So there's evidence collection, hearing, just like any other court case, except obviously on a much larger scale. Then the jury deliberates and votes in public, and then if 2/3 majority of the Senate agree, then he will be convicted and removed from office. So that's the other big thing. Impeachment does not equal removal. 2/3 of the Senate must vote to actually remove the president from office. All right, so kind of transitioning from impeachment into other current events is with Minnesota and their policing reforms. So recently, what has been happening in Minnesota is that the police department as a whole announced a change in policy. Basically, they said that if a police officer is off duty, they cannot wear their uniforms at political rallies, especially when they're like by themselves. So that's what kind of off duty means. So their point is that the police department should present an unbiased. They should have that unbiased look to them, and it should be neutral. So they don't want police officers to be at events, maybe for Trump or maybe for Elizabeth Warren or Biden, and that indicate to other people that okay, the police department is supporting the Republican candidate or the police department is supporting the Democratic candidate. So this move actually drew opposition from the head of the city's police union, and kind of what was the reason behind this was that Trump was actually scheduled to visit this past week, and there was a lot of suspicion that okay, because Trump is visiting, the Minnesota Police Department actually enacted this change in policy. A kind of question to consider is that can it happen elsewhere? That's definitely something that's been in almost the agenda that's not presented to us. We know that police departments and a lot of the other parts of local governments do not want to be directly affiliated with the candidates due to like a polarized situation in the country. Yeah. So the other thing that I believe someone asked a question. Let's see. If Trump is impeached and not removed, can he be reelected? Yes, he can. And yeah, basically what Dylan said. And then do the same judicial laws apply here, like the Fifth and Sixth Amendments and such, specifically like double jeopardy. If Trump is found innocent according to the Constitution, he can't be retried for the same count. He can't be retried for the same charge. So like he can't be like if they're talking about the Ukrainian scandal, then he can't be retried again in regards to the Ukrainian scandal or what the trial was actually investigating. However, if 2 years down the line it's that something about campaign finance, then he can be retried, and that process can happen again. So that inquiry process can happen again. It's kind of like if somebody is convicted of murder of person A, they can't be retried for the murder of person A after they're found innocent. But if they murder another person, person B, they can definitely there can definitely be a trial to judge and see if they actually killed person B. So kind of a crude comparison, but that's kind of the way that works. So you can't be double jeopardy. You can't be retried for the same exact charge, but it can be something very similar. The other thing is kind of a little bit personal, not personal, but kind of a local thing that's happening in our city, and it's kind of you can see what's happening. So I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the Republican National Convention is being hosted here. So kind of something that's unique. with this one was that the mayor of the city, Vi Lyles, is actually a Democrat, and she pushed for pushed for the RNC to come here. So the reason for that was she thought it would bring financial opportunity. A lot of the city council members, even Republicans, did not want the convention to come here because of fears of security and already the polarization. They didn't want Charlotte to be associated with what they believed was a candidate that might not be fit. So, however, Vilas really pushed for that. And something unique about it is that she will not be giving a welcome speech, which is something that's kind of traditional for visiting mayors to do, or the hosting mayors to do. But something interesting is that security preparations have already started for the RNC. So Charlotte actually hosted the DNC in 2012, the Democratic Convention, with Obama. But experts say that because of increased polarization in the country, we need more security in Charlotte now, and that's something that has already been that's already started with preparations. The next slide is the last slide, and this is kind of shifting away from the whole election talk and a little bit more about our military involvement. So the US has decided to send more forces to Saudi Arabia despite Trump's claims to reduce overall military involvement in the Middle East. So recently, the US pulled forces from Syria or northern Syria, and this has already kind of caused a lot of controversy because the allies to the US in that area, the Kurdish forces, now are kind of fighting alone, and many believe that they've been basically the US has abandoned them. The reason for the U.S. sending more troops to Saudi Arabia is basically there had recently been an attack on oil production facilities there, which oil in the Middle East, they're associated together with everything, and an attack on oil production there can have big effects around the world. And these strikes on oil production has basically been blamed on Iran. Although Trump, like I said before, had claimed to reduce military involvement, this is a place where he decided that we do need troops. There has already been rising tension with U.S. involvement in general in the Middle East after he pulled the troops from Syria, and now again pushing back with Saudi Arabia has kind of shifted the balance, you could say. Right. So now we're going to transition into the election. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, okay. What is polarization? So polarization is basically like the division of the country. So when you have people that are so divided on a particular issue that they're completely left, completely right, what we've seen over the past 20 to 30 years is that our country has become more polarized or more divided. So polarization is basically just another word for extreme division, but that's something that's been happening in our country where it's transitioned from people being moderate to people slowly transitioning into more left and more right views. Does that make sense?
Okay, so on that note, let's start talking about the Democratic primary debates. So obviously there's been a lot of them in like the past few months, but the next one is actually going to be on Tuesday, October 15th, which is tomorrow. And so it's going to be the fourth primary Democratic debate. And so it's being held in Ohio, and it starts at 5 p.m. Pacific. So I know that some of y'all's like Gov teachers might assign it as homework to like watch and take notes and stuff. So keep in mind that it's happening tomorrow. And to qualify for this debate, the Democratic candidates needed at least 2% in 4 different Democratic National Committee approved polls. And so these tended to be polls that were either taken at the national level or polls in early primary states. And those are states like Iowa and New Hampshire and like states that come early in like the Democratic primary like map. And they also needed at least 130,000 unique donations by October 1st to qualify. So like the window for being able to like get on stage for that has already closed. So we've actually had 12 people qualify, and those people are 10 of them actually participated in the September debates. And so it was Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Beto O'Rourke, Julian Castro, Amy Klobuchar, and Andrew Yang. And then 2 people who didn't qualify for the September debate or participate in the debate, but will be participating because they qualified in the October for the October debate are Tulsi Gabbard and Tom Steyer. And so this is actually Tom Steyer's first time on the debate stage. So people are saying that, like, even though the Democratic National Committee is trying to like make the field smaller for like this most recent debate, 12 people on one stage is the biggest that Democrats have ever had. So that's something to think about. And on top of that, you guys might remember from a couple streams ago, we talked about how Senator Bernie Sanders was hospitalized and he had surgery. So it's actually uncertain whether or not he's going to take the stage because he had a heart attack recently. And so people are saying that if he does take the stage, the other candidates might choose to not directly attack him and like challenge his like participation within like the big three, which is like the three front runners, which is Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, and Senator Sanders, because he literally just got out of the hospital and had heart surgery. So yeah, that's something to think about. And the general election schedule debate schedule has also been set. And so even though like the primary like parties are able to set the debate schedule for like their own like specific party and that nomination, the general election debates are actually held by a nonprofit. And so it's called the Commission on Presidential Debates. And so they've decided that there's going to be 3 of them, 1 in September and then 2 in October. And the commission said that it's going to invite candidates that appear on a sufficient number of state ballots to have a mathematical chance of winning a majority vote in the Electoral College. And what that means is that they're only going to be inviting candidates that like could win the Electoral College. So a lot of times like independents end up being excluded from these like general election debates because it's not like mathematically feasible to actually win the majority of the Electoral College if you don't appear on enough state ballots. And so on top of that, any invited candidate will also have to have an average of a minimum 15% support among the national electorate in polls that are conducted by 5 different selected national public opinion polling organizations. And so what that means is that it's a very high bar to qualify for these general election debates. And so that's why we only saw President Donald Trump and Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton participate in the general election debates in the past 2016 election, because it's very difficult to qualify to actually appear in these debates if you're not appearing on a lot of state ballots, and because if your party isn't well known nationally, it's difficult to get an average of 15% in national polls. And so, yeah, it's very likely that we'll only see the Democratic nominee and the Republican nominee take the stage for the general election debates. And on top of that, there's also going to be a vice presidential debate. And so there's only going to be one of those. And yeah, it's going to be held on October 7th, right before the last 2 presidential debates. So there's also a lot happening in terms of battleground states. And so one of the most recent states that's being considered a battleground state is Michigan, because even though it was a solidly blue, oh, hey, cool, Ashley lives in Michigan. It was considered to be like a solid blue Democratic state until the 2016 election. And so in the 2016 election, Trump won the state by a margin of 10,704 votes. And so that helped him get to the number he needed in the Electoral College. And so before that, it had been considered a Democratic state, like I said a couple times before. And so Republicans and Democrats, recognizing that it's a very important battleground state, they're really focusing a lot of funding and infrastructure in Michigan. And so they're training volunteers and hiring more staff in order to make sure that their respective parties are more competitive come the 2020 elections. And so that being said, they've already started running campaign ads and buying airtime in order to have the space to actually run campaign ads. And so in 2018, and one of the reasons it's a very currently politically important state for both the Democrats and the Republicans to target, is because in 2018, Democrats flipped 3 different statewide seats that had formerly been held by Republicans. And so the state's really going in between Republicans in 2016, and then in 2018, Democrats did really well, both in terms of like statewide seats, and they like gained 3 different ones that had been held by Republicans, but also in the state legislature, like the state Senate, the state House, and like 3 different House seats. Democrats also like flipped a lot of those on like the local level. So both Republicans and Democrats are like trying to gain the advantage in Michigan. And so it's becoming a very important state for the 2020 election. And so last week we talked a little bit about election interference in terms of like Iran trying to interfere and like hack into different people's emails. But now the Senate Intelligence Committee, which is being led by a Republican, has been investigating foreign electoral interference for more than 2 years. And so that's super important because some people might just assume because like the Senate panel that's like actually leading this is being dominated by Republicans, that they're not really focusing a lot on how important preventing foreign electoral interference is, because they might have like some bias to help President Trump win. But that's actually the exact opposite of what's happening. They're actually really making sure that they're like focusing on the facts. So they referenced Robert Mueller's report a lot in the most recent report that they released. And they said that Russians worked to damage Democrat Hillary Clinton, and they also worked to help Donald Trump. And they also went on to say that in 2020, it's also likely that some foreign interference is going to happen. And so recognizing that foreign electoral interference is incredibly important and is very likely to hurt like the democratic process, they had some like recommendations for both the government and the private industry. So the bipartisan commission recommended that Congress like really needs to start acting, because the 2020 election isn't that far off, and making sure that like American elections are secure isn't something that's going to happen overnight. So they said that they should adopt new regulations that would make ad disclosure more transparent. And they also asked the White House to be more aggressive and public in warning Americans about how dangerous misinformation can be and how easily it can be spread, right? Because right now we're not really seeing a lot of messaging coming out of like the Trump White House talking about how problematic foreign election interference is and how easy it is to create misinformation, right? Like arguably, like the president is like spreading misinformation on Twitter himself. So that's something that like Congress and this bipartisan commission is really worried about. So they also recommended that the executive branch like start creating like teams and task forces within the US government to make sure that like threats are being monitored when it comes to foreign election interference, and so that they can like share intelligence with like different social media sites perhaps, and like people that are in the private industry. So that's something that Congress is like trying to work hard to like get done. And so the bipartisan commission also said that the private sector also needs to act in order to like prevent this foreign election interference. So social media companies have been the focus of these recommendations, because that's usually where misinformation has been spread. So that's sites like Facebook and Twitter, and like not Pinterest, but you know, that's a social media site. So they asked Silicon Valley to share like the intelligence that they have among their different companies, right? So in 2016, there wasn't a lot of that sharing happening. So there was a disconnect in between like the information that Facebook had about like potential interference and like Twitter. So like both of those social media sites are very big and like have a lot of influence when it comes to how people are consuming news. So the Senate Commission is saying that like they need to start working together in order to like prevent misinformation from being spread, because a lot of information from Facebook might like spread onto Twitter, or like vice versa, where like people screenshot tweets and like post them on Facebook. So like that's something that like has misinformation spread really fast, and it's difficult to like correct it, because a lot of people will like see the misinformation, but they won't see the fact check. So the Senate Commission is saying that it's really important for them to start like sharing information to like actually prevent that from happening in the first place. So yeah, that being said, that's our like short update for what's been happening in the week, both in terms of elections and in terms of current events.